I never thought I would be telling this story. For months, I've wrestled with whether I should share what I experienced, what I saw on the other side. But after what Jesus revealed to me during those moments between life and death, I realize now that staying silent is no longer an option. This isn't just my story anymore. It's a message for all of humanity, and time is running out. My name is Sarah Mitchell. Before October 12, 2023, I was just another ER nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. 15 years on the job had hardened me to the daily parade of trauma and tragedy that rolled through our doors. I'd seen countless patients slip away, their last breaths echoing in sterile hospital rooms. I thought I understood death. I thought I knew what waited on the other side. I was wrong. So terribly, completely wrong. That autumn evening started like any other. A 12-hour shift had left me bone weary, my scrubs carrying the lingering sense of antiseptic and coffee. The hospital corridors were quieter than usual as I gathered my things from my locker, looking forward to getting home to my husband James and our teenage daughter Emma. They'd be waiting up for me, probably with takeout from that little Thai place we loved. Just another Thursday night. The parking garage was almost empty when I reached level 3, my footsteps echoing off concrete walls. I remember checking my phone, 8:47 p.m., and thinking I might actually make it home in time to watch an episode of that new series Emma had been begging me to start. The keys jingled in my hand as I approached my Honda Civic, the same car I'd driven for the past 8 years. Such an ordinary moment. Isn't it strange how the most extraordinary experiences often begin in the most mundane ways? I never saw the man who had been hiding between the cars, never heard his footsteps. The first thing I felt was the impact, something hard and cold, striking the back of my head. The world tilted sideways, my phone clattering across the concrete as I fell. There was no pain, not at first. Just a sudden, overwhelming confusion as my vision began to blur at the edges. I tried to call out, but my tongue felt thick and unresponsive. Somewhere far away, I heard running footsteps fading into the distance. My purse was gone. A robbery, I realized dimly. After 15 years of helping others survive their worst moments, I was going to die alone in a parking garage over a purse containing nothing more valuable than some crumpled receipts and half a pack of mint gum. The concrete was cold against my cheek. I could feel something warm and wet spreading beneath my head, and I knew without looking that it was blood, my blood. Years of medical training kicked in, and I understood with terrifying clarity what was happening. Subdural hematoma, brain, hemorrhage. The statistics and survival rates flashed through my mind like a grotesque PowerPoint presentation. My thoughts turned to James and Emma. Who would tell them? Would someone think to check the security cameras? Would they find me in time? The fluorescent lights above began to pulse and fade, their harsh glare dissolving into a gathering darkness. I tried to move, to crawl toward my phone, lying just a few feet away, but my limbs wouldn't respond. Please, I whispered, though I'm not sure if the word actually left my lips. Please, God, not like this. The darkness continued to spread, like ink bleeding across wet paper. My last conscious thought was of Emma's face. She had my eyes. Everyone always said so. And then, everything changed. The transition wasn't gradual. One moment I was lying on the cold garage floor, and the next, I was somewhere else, somewhere impossible. The best way I can describe it is like suddenly finding yourself underwater after expecting to step onto solid ground. That moment of total disorientation, when everything you thought you knew about your surroundings is proven wrong in an instant. I was floating, or perhaps falling, Direction had lost all meaning. There was no up or down, no light or dark, just a vast, endless expanse of something. The closest comparison I can make is to those deep-sea documentaries where submarines shine their lights into the absolute darkness of the ocean's depths. Except here, I was both the light and the darkness, both the observer and the observed. All physical sensation had vanished. I no longer felt the pain in my head or the weight of my body. In fact, I couldn't feel my body at all, yet I was more aware, more conscious than I had ever been in my life. Every thought was crystalline, every memory razor sharp. Time seemed to stretch and compress like taffy, simultaneously lasting an eternity and passing in the blink of an eye, and then I heard it. A voice. No, not just a voice. A presence. It filled every corner of this impossible space, resonating not through my ears, but through the very essence of whatever I had become. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced, carrying with it a weight of authority and love, so profound that I felt it might shatter me completely. Sarah, just my name, but in that single word was contained multitudes. Every moment of my life, every choice I had ever made, every prayer whispered in darkness, and every doubt harbored in silence. All of it was known, all of it was seen, and despite everything, despite all my failures and fears and imperfections, I was loved, completely, unconditionally, overwhelmingly loved. I knew with absolute certainty that I was in the presence of Jesus Christ. But this wasn't the gentle shepherd from my childhood Sunday school lessons, or the serene figure from stained glass windows. This was the Lion of Judah, the King of Kings, and he had a message, a final warning for humanity that would shake me to my very core. What he showed me in those moments would forever change my understanding of everything, of time, of reality, of the true nature of the battle being waged for human souls. And now, as I sit here months later, my hands trembling as I type these words, I understand why I was allowed to return. This story isn't about me. It's about what's coming. It's about a choice that every single person on earth will soon have to make. And it's about why we have less time than any of us realize. The first thing I noticed was the silence. After 15 years working in an ER, you become attuned to the constant symphony of life and death. The beeping monitors, squeaking gurney wheels, urgent voices, and muffled sobs. But now, floating near the ceiling of that parking garage, I was enveloped in perfect stillness. I watched as security guard Tom Ramirez found my body during his nightly rounds. I knew Tom. We'd exchanged friendly nods for years, sometimes shared coffee in the break room. Now I watched as his face drained of color, watched him fumble for his radio with shaking hands. His voice echoed through the concrete structure. "Officer down, level 3, I need medical now, officer down." The words almost made me laugh. If such a thing was possible in my current state, I wasn't an officer, just a nurse who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I suppose to Tom, anyone in scrubs was part of the same team. What happened next was like watching a movie about my own life, except I was somehow both audience and participant. I saw the first responders arrive, some of them my own colleagues. Dr. Chen, who just finished his shift in the ER, took charge of the scene. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he checked my vital signs, called out orders. I wanted to tell him I was fine, that I was right here, but of course he couldn't hear me. Pulse is thready. BP dropping. "We need to move now." I followed as they rushed my body to the ER, floating through walls and doors, as if they were made of smoke. It was strange seeing the hospital from this perspective. like being both insider and outsider at once. In Trauma Room 1, I watched my friends and colleagues fight to save my life. Their movements were precise, professional, but I could see the tension in their faces. They knew me. This wasn't supposed to happen to one of their own. Starting compressions. Push 1 of epi. Where's that oneg? We need it now. I felt no attachment to the broken body on the table. The woman they were working on seemed more like a stranger than myself. Instead, my attention was drawn to the small details I'd never noticed before. The way light bounced off the metal instruments, the complex dance of hands and bodies as the trauma team worked, the patterns of energy that seemed to flow between people like invisible threads. Then, James arrived. My husband's face was ashen as Dr. Chin met him in the hallway. I tried to reach for him, to tell him I was here, that everything would be okay, but my consciousness passed through him like a breeze. Emma was with him, our teenage daughter trying so hard to be brave, even as tears streamed down her face. She clutched her father's arm, her knuckles white with tension. "Dad!" Her voice cracked. "Is Mom going to die?" The question hung in the air, heavy with fear and possibility. I wanted to gather her in my arms, to smooth her hair the way I had when she was small. Instead, I could only watch as James pulled her close, his own tears falling into her hair. "Your mom's strong," he whispered. "She's the strongest person I know." I lingered with them, watching as the hours crawled by. The initial chaos of the trauma room gave way to the measured beeps of machines. My body, now stabilized but unresponsive, was transferred to the ICU. Family and friends began to arrive. My sister Kate making the 2-hour drive from Philadelphia. My parents catching the first flight from Florida. Their grief and worry wrapped around them like heavy cloaks. But something was changing. The more time I spent in this in-between state, the more I became aware of another reality overlaying our own. It started subtly. Glimpses of light that seemed to pulse with meaning. Whispers that carried no sound, yet conveyed profound truth. The hospital walls began to appear less solid, more like veils between worlds. And then I felt it. A gentle but inexorable pull upward. Away from the familiar world of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. The sensation was unlike anything I'd experienced in life. It wasn't physical. It was as if the very essence of who I was being drawn toward something, someone. The hospital scene began to fade, growing distant, like a reflection in water. The pull strengthened, and with it came a peace so profound it defied description. All my earthly concerns, my worry for my family, my fear of death, even my identity as Sarah Mitchell, began to fall away like autumn leaves in a gentle wind. I was ascending, or perhaps the world was descending away from me. Direction had lost all meaning in this space between spaces. The darkness that surrounded me wasn't empty. It was alive with possibilities, pregnant with purpose, and through it all, I felt loved. Completely, unconditionally, overwhelmingly loved. Then I heard it, my name, spoken with such perfect knowledge of who I was, who I had been, and who I was meant to be, that it brought what remained of my consciousness to its knees. Sarah. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, filling every particle of my being with its resonance. Though I couldn't yet see its source, I knew with absolute certainty who was calling me. This wasn't the Jesus of Sunday school lessons or church paintings. This was the creator of universes, the light that ignites stars, the word that spoke existence into being. And he had something to show me. The darkness began to part like a curtain, revealing a radiance that would have blinded physical eyes. But I no longer needed physical eyes to see. What lay before me was truth in its purest form, reality stripped of all illusion. Then I saw him. How do you describe the indescribable? How do you put into words an encounter that transcends language itself? Even now, months later, I struggle to capture the magnitude of that moment, but I must try. For what comes next is why I'm sharing this story at all. He stood before me, and reality itself seemed to bow in his presence. The light that emanated from him wasn't just brightness. It was truth made visible, love given form. His eyes, oh, his eyes, they burned with the fire of 1,000 suns. Yet I could look directly into them without being consumed. They held within them every moment of creation, every tear ever shed, every prayer ever whispered. They saw me, truly saw me, with a depth of understanding that stripped away every pretense, every mask I'd ever worn. In those eyes, I saw both justice and mercy, perfectly balanced. They contained the weight of divine authority and the tender compassion of a father watching his child take their first steps. I saw my own reflection in them, not as I was, but as I was meant to be, as he had always seen me. His face shone with a glory that would have annihilated my physical body, yet in this state, I could perceive it without being destroyed. It was like looking at the heart of creation itself. His features were both distinct and fluid, somehow containing every face of love I had ever known, while being entirely other, entirely divine. When he spoke, his voice resonated through every particle of my being. It carried the power that had spoken universes into existence, yet it was as intimate as a whisper between closest friends. Sarah, my daughter. Just 3 words, but they rewrote everything I thought I knew about myself and my place in creation. In his presence, I saw my life as he saw it. Every moment of joy and sorrow, every act of kindness, and every failure, every prayer spoken in faith, and every doubt harbored in darkness. And through it all, his love had never wavered, never diminished. I fell to my knees, or whatever passed for knees in this state of being. How could I not? Every fiber of my existence cried out in recognition of who he was. This was Jesus Christ, but not as I had imagined him. This was the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one before whom every knee will bow and every tongue confess. Lord, I managed to whisper, though I had no physical voice. My Lord and my God. He smiled then, and it was like watching dawn break over every world that ever was or would be. His hand extended toward me, the hand that had been pierced for my sins, that had carved the paths of rivers and set the stars in their courses. Rise, my child, I have brought you here for a purpose. His words lifted me up, not just physically, but spiritually. I stood before him, trembling, yet unafraid. The love radiating from him was too perfect to allow for fear. There is a message you must carry, he continued. A final warning for humanity. Final warning. The words sent a shiver through my soul. But Lord, I protested, my unworthiness overwhelming me. I'm just a nurse. Who would believe me? I'm nobody special. His laughter then. Oh, how to describe it? It was like music that had written all other music, joy that had birthed all other joy. My precious child, he said, when have I ever needed the credentials of the world to accomplish my purposes? Did I not choose shepherds to first announce my birth, fishermen to build my church, a tax collector to write my gospel? I saw then, in a flash of divine insight, how he had been preparing me all along, my years as a nurse, witnessing both the miracles of healing and the reality of death, my struggles with faith, my questions, my doubts. All of it had been preparation for this moment. The time is shorter than they know. he continued, his voice taking on an urgency that seemed to vibrate through the fabric of reality itself. My people have grown comfortable in their confusion, content in their compromise. Many who call themselves by my name have fashioned a god in their own image, one who demands nothing, changes nothing, saves nothing. But I am who I am, and I will not be mocked. His eyes blazed brighter then, and I saw in them a love so fierce it was almost terrifying. This was not the gentle Jesus of children's stories. This was the Lion of Judah, the righteous judge, the one whose return will shake the foundations of heaven and earth. What you are about to see must be shared, he said. Some will mock, some will deny, but my sheep know my voice, and those who have ears to hear will hear. He extended his hand to me again, and this time I saw the scar where the nail had pierced his flesh. Come, he said. Let me show you what is to come. His fingers touched mine, and suddenly we were moving. Or perhaps reality was moving around us. The light that surrounded him began to expand, encompassing both of us in its brilliant embrace. I felt myself being drawn along with him, away from the familiar dimensions of space and time, into something vast and profound and terrible. What he showed me next would shatter every preconception I had about the world we live in. The battle being waged for human souls, and the time we have left before his return. The visions he gave me that day are why I'm breaking my silence now, why I can no longer stay quiet about what I experienced. Because what's coming is both more wonderful and more terrible than anything we could imagine, and we are running out of time to prepare. The scene before me shifted, like ripples across water. The familiar dimensions of light and space transformed into something else, a window into what was yet to come. Jesus' presence remained beside me, his hand still holding mine, as we began to witness the future unfold. Watch carefully, he said, his voice carrying both love and warning. For what you see is how the great deception begins. The world that materialized before us was breathtaking in its sophistication. I saw cities that gleamed with impossible architecture, streets that pulsed with embedded lights, and people moving through their daily lives, surrounded by technology that seemed like magic. But there was something else, something beneath the surface that made my soul tremble. We stood invisible among crowds of people going about their business. A mother and child caught my attention. The woman waving her hand casually over a payment terminal as they left a store. A faint glow visible beneath her skin where an implant resided. Her young daughter bounced beside her, begging for her own grown-up chip. The scene was so normal, so innocent, that it would have been easy to miss its significance. Do you see? Jesus asked. How darkness comes wrapped in light. We moved through time and space, witnessing snapshot after snapshot of this brave new world. In a sleek megachurch, congregants simply passed their hands over censers to give their tithes, their biological signatures, linking instantly to their accounts. The pastor praised the convenience from a holographic pulpit, speaking of how technology was helping advance God's kingdom. They believe they are serving me, Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. But they are gradually accepting chains they cannot see. I watched as governments rolled out security initiatives, biometric scanners in schools to protect children, mandatory health monitors to prevent disease outbreaks, financial systems that required biological verification to prevent fraud. Each step was logical, beneficial, making life easier and safer. Who could argue against protecting children, against stopping disease, against preventing crime? A scene unfolded of a family dinner. 3 generations gathered around a table. The grandmother was refusing to get upgraded with the latest implant. Her children were arguing with her, their voices full of concern and frustration. "Mom, be reasonable," the daughter pleaded. "The health monitoring alone could save your life, and you won't have to worry about losing your medical ID or forgetting to take your medications." "It's just like getting a pacemaker," the son added. "Remember how scared you were of that? And now you don't even think about it." The elderly woman looked uncertain. "But in my day, they warned us about the mark of the—" "Oh, Mom, not that again." The daughter rolled her eyes. "This isn't some science fiction story. It's medical technology, approved by the FDA and endorsed by every major religious leader. Even the Pope has one." I felt Jesus' grief as we watched the scene play out. "My people perish for lack of knowledge," he said quietly. "They have forgotten how to test the spirits, how to watch and pray. They have traded eternal wisdom for temporary convenience." We moved through more scenes. Corporate offices where employees eagerly lined up for their digital upgrade. Schools where children played with augmented reality through their neural interfaces. Shopping centers where those without embedded payment systems were viewed with suspicion and denied service. A news broadcast caught my attention. A charismatic figure was speaking about unity, peace, and the need for universal adoption of the Global Digital Identity Initiative. His words were honeyed, his presence magnetic. World leaders nodded in agreement as he spoke of ending poverty, ensuring universal healthcare, and protecting the environment. All through this new system of total digital integration. Is he? I couldn't finish the question. "Not yet," Jesus answered. "He is merely preparing the way. The one who is to come will seem even more perfect, more righteous, more worthy of worship." Remember, Satan himself appears as an angel of light. We witnessed as society transformed, step by step. Cash became obsolete. Physical ID documents disappeared. Healthcare, banking, voting, social services. Everything required biometric verification. Those who resisted were not arrested or persecuted. They were simply left behind, unable to fully participate in society. Their children were denied school admission. Their businesses couldn't process payments. Their social media accounts were restricted. They became invisible, irrelevant, isolated. "Lord," I whispered, horror growing in my heart. "Is this the mark of the beast?" "Not yet," he replied. "This is only the preparation, the softening of hearts, the gradual surrender of sovereignty, the slow erosion of boundaries between flesh and silicon, between human and machine. Watch how the deception unfolds." The scene shifted again, and what I saw next made my soul cry out in anguish, because the true mark, when it finally came, would be far more terrible than anyone had imagined, and by then, most of humanity would have been perfectly conditioned to accept it. The vision shifted again, and the world I saw now was one in chaos. The gleaming cities we'd witnessed earlier were darkened by rolling blackouts. Streets once filled with autonomous vehicles were clogged with abandoned cars. The seamless digital society had begun to crack and strain under the weight of multiple catastrophes. "Behold," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "how the enemy uses desperation to complete his deception." I watched as a series of global crises unfolded with devastating speed. A new pandemic, far deadlier than anything seen before, swept across continents. Financial markets collapsed overnight, wiping out savings and pensions. Wars erupted over dwindling resources. Climate disasters displaced millions. Each crisis seemed to build upon the others, creating a perfect storm of global chaos. The same charismatic leader we'd seen earlier appeared again, this time addressing a desperate world from the UN General Assembly. His voice was calm, assured, offering hope in humanity's darkest hour. "We have the solution," he declared, his image broadcast on every surviving screen worldwide. "We have developed a system that will ensure fair distribution of resources, prevent disease transmission, and restore economic stability. But it will only work if everyone participates. Every single person must be integrated into the new global network." The system, he revealed, went far beyond the biological implants we'd seen before. This was something new, a quantum leap in human-machine integration. They called it the Unity Protocol, a direct neural interface that would connect every human mind to a global artificial intelligence network. No more hunger, the leader promised. No more disease. No more war. No more separation between human and divine. We will all be as gods. Religious leaders stepped forward to endorse the system. I watched in horror as prestigious theologians explained how this was the next step in human evolution, how it would fulfill humanity's destiny to become like God. They cited scripture out of context, twisted to support their claims. Look closer. Jesus commanded, "See what truly happens when they accept this mark." My spiritual vision deepened, and I could suddenly see beyond the physical realm. As people received the Unity Protocol implant, I witnessed something that will haunt me forever. Their souls, their very essence, began to change. It was as if a light within them was being systematically extinguished, replaced by something artificial, something alien. These marked individuals could still pray, still attend religious services, still speak of God, but I saw with horrifying clarity that they were now praying to emptiness. The divine connection that exists in every human soul had been severed, replaced with a counterfeit that felt real but led nowhere. "They cannot hear me anymore," Jesus said, his voice filled with deep anguish. "They have traded their divine inheritance for a lie. They believe they are ascending, becoming more than human, but they have cut themselves off from the very source of their humanity." I watched as people lined up eagerly to receive the mark, totally unaware of the spiritual transformation taking place. Parents brought their children, proud to give them a better future. Pastors received it from their pulpits, calling it a divine blessing. The elderly were told it would extend their lives. The poor were promised it would end their poverty. But what I saw in the spiritual realm was horrifying. Each person who received the mark experienced an invisible but profound separation from God. It was like watching lights being snuffed out one by one, leaving behind something that looked human, but had lost the divine spark that makes us truly human. "Lord," I cried out, "they don't understand what they're doing. They think they're saving themselves." "This is why I am showing you these things," he replied. "The deception will be so complete, so convincing, that even the very elect would be deceived. If that were possible, they will not take the mark by force, but will beg to receive it, believing it is their salvation." I witnessed as society reorganized around this new system. Those who refused the mark were completely cut off from society, unable to buy food, access medical care, or participate in any aspect of the digital economy. But those who accepted it lost something far more precious, their very souls. The marked population began to change in subtle ways. Their emotions became muted, their empathy diminished. They could still simulate love, joy, and faith, but these were now programs running on an artificial platform, rather than genuine human experiences. They had gained the world, but lost their souls in the most literal sense. Most horrifying of all, they couldn't perceive what they had lost. They felt more connected, more spiritual, more evolved than ever before. The artificial network they were now part of provided a counterfeit transcendence that perfectly mimicked spiritual enlightenment, while leading them further from true divinity. This is why the choice cannot be undone. Jesus explained, "They are not merely marking their bodies, or even their minds. They are permanently transforming the very essence of what makes them human. They are exchanging the divine image in which they were created for a counterfeit that cannot be reversed." I watched as the last holdouts were pressured to conform. Families were torn apart. Children were separated from unfit parents who refused the mark. Those who tried to warn others were labeled as mentally ill, dangerous extremists who needed to be helped into compliance. "Tell them," Jesus commanded, his voice now urgent and powerful. "Tell them that when this time comes, no promise of security, no threat of hardship, no offer of power or enlightenment is worth the cost. Tell them that I am coming soon, but they must endure until I do. Tell them that what they preserve by refusing the mark is worth more than all the wealth, health, and knowledge this world can offer." The vision began to fade, but the weight of what I had witnessed pressed upon my soul with unbearable gravity. I had seen how the end would come, not with violence and force, but with promises of peace and prosperity. Not through oppression, but through convenience. Not through the destruction of faith, but through its subtle perversion. And I understood why I had been allowed to return, why this warning had to be shared. Because when the time comes, the choice humanity faces will not appear to be a choice between good and evil, between God and Satan, between truth and lies. It will appear to be a choice between suffering and prosperity, between death and life, between ignorance and enlightenment, but it will actually be the final choice between retaining our divine nature and surrendering it forever. The transition back was not gentle. One moment I was with Jesus, witnessing visions of humanity's future. The next, I was slammed back into my body with the force of a lightning strike. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. My head throbbing, every nerve ending, screaming to life. The sterile hospital smell hit me first, followed by the familiar beeping of monitors and the murmur of voices. "She's responding. Get Dr. Chen in here now." My eyes felt weighted with lead, but I forced them open. The fluorescent lights above were painfully bright. A nurse, Maria, who I'd worked with countless times, was leaning over me, her face a mixture of professional concern and personal relief. "Sarah? Sarah, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." I managed a weak squeeze, though even that small movement felt like lifting a mountain. My throat was raw from the intubation, tube that had been removed at some point. How long had I been unconscious? The question must have shown in my eyes. "You've been out for 3 days, Maria explained, checking my vitals with practiced efficiency. "You gave us quite a scare. 3 days. It had felt like both an eternity and a single moment. The visions Jesus had shown me were still blazing, in my mind, as fresh and real as if I were still experiencing them. I tried to speak, but only managed a hoarse whisper. "Water." After some ice chips and careful sips through a straw, I began to piece together what had happened in the physical world while I was away. The security cameras had caught my attacker, a desperate drug addict who had been arrested trying to use my credit cards. The blow to my head had caused severe trauma, and I had technically died twice on the operating table before they stabilized me. James was there suddenly, his eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. Emma was with him, practically, throwing herself onto the bed to hug me before the nurses could stop her. Their tears of joy and relief were like a balm, but even as I held them, I felt the weight of what I had witnessed pressing down on me. How could I tell them? How could I explain what I had seen? What I knew was coming. The words felt impossible, yet I knew they had to be spoken. The next few weeks were a blur of recovery, physical therapy, and attempting to process everything I had experienced. I watched the news with new eyes, seeing the pieces falling into place, just as Jesus had shown me. Technology companies announcing breakthrough neural interfaces, governments implementing new digital identity systems, religious leaders praising the merger of faith and technology. It was all happening, step by step, exactly as I had seen. I began keeping a journal, trying to capture every detail of the visions before they could fade. The doctors attributed my intense focus on writing to a coping mechanism for trauma. My family worried I was becoming obsessed, but how could I not be? I had been shown the future. Not some vague prophecy, but specific events that were already beginning to unfold. One morning, about 6 weeks after my return, I was watching a tech CEO give a presentation about their new, revolutionary biodigital integration system. The language he used was almost word for word what I had heard in my vision. I felt the blood drain from my face as he spoke about transcending human limitations and merging with the divine through technology. That was the moment I knew I could stay silent no longer. I began writing this account, knowing full well how it would sound to most people. A near-death experience, visions of the future, warnings about the mark of the beast. Even many Christians would dismiss it as the product of an oxygen-deprived brain or post-trauma stress. But I know what I saw. I know who I spoke with, and I know why I was sent back. To those reading this, I understand if you're skeptical. Before my experience, I would have been too, but I beg you to consider what I'm about to say with an open heart and mind. Because time is running out, the technology that will eventually become the mark is already being developed. The social conditioning to accept it is already underway. The crises that will make it seem necessary are already building. By the time it becomes mandatory, most people will see refusing it as foolish, even selfish. But I have seen what it really does to the human soul. I have witnessed the spiritual death that comes with that choice. No amount of comfort, security, or prosperity is worth the price of eternal separation from God. To my fellow believers, stay anchored in God's word. Don't be seduced by promises of a better world through technology. When religious leaders begin endorsing these systems, remember that even the very elect would be deceived, if that were possible. To those who don't believe, I urge you to seek God while He can still be found. The time is coming when that choice will be permanently taken away. What I saw was not just about religion. It was about the very essence of what makes us human. To everyone, watch. Pay attention. When you see the world moving in the direction I've described, remember this warning. When the crises come and a technological solution is offered, remember what I witnessed. When they say peace and safety, remember that destruction comes suddenly. Jesus told me that many would not believe this warning, and I understand why. It sounds fantastic, frightening, even fanatical, but He also told me that those who have ears to hear would recognize the truth in these words. I am just a nurse who died and was sent back with a message. I have no special authority, no platform, no credentials that would make my story more believable. But I have something more important. I have the truth, shown to me by Jesus Christ Himself. The choice is coming. Sooner than any of us realize, every person on earth will have to decide: temporary security or eternal life, earthly comfort or divine connection, the mark of the beast or the mark of God. I pray you choose wisely. I pray you choose life, Because once that choice is made, it cannot be unmade. An eternity is a very long time to live with the wrong decision.